Welcome to the State of Cyber War, a production of the Science, Secure, and Mind series of podcasts. Join us as we discuss international cybersecurity policy, information warfare, cyber defense, and how they affect the digital security of the world around us. Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of the latest episode in our State of Cyber War podcast and video series on the Middle East. We just finished recording an episode on Israeli cybersecurity, cyber warfare, and disinformation capabilities and campaigns. And now we're going to be talking about Iran. With us today is Hugo Tarida, fellow Cyan member. My name is John Solomon. And I think we'll kick it right off with a quick overview of the Iranian organizational structure of their cyber conflict and cyber warfare capabilities. If you haven't seen it yet, I strongly encourage you to look at our previous 2 videos on this topic. The first one in this kind of mini series where we talked about the Middle East in general at a fairly high level. We touched on some of these issues with regards to the Iranians. And, you know, to give you some context, we're not going to be talking about current events so much. Obviously, there's impact on current events, but we'll leave the analysis to the news and intelligence organizations. Some of particularly what Hugo is going to touch on will concern Iranian involvement in activities surrounding the Israel-Gaza war and similar issues. But for my part, I'll start with some of the background here. The main Iranian offensive cyber warfare capability is focused around the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. For those of you who are not familiar with the structure of Iran's military, there are 2 primary organizations. Those are the Islamic Republic of Iran, I believe it's called, Armed Forces, and the IRGC. The IRGC is primarily concerned with not only, but is the primary organization concerned with their foreign operations, including the Quds Force that is tasked with their, for example, support for guerrilla organizations like Hezbollah, like the Houthis in Yemen, and other places where Iran wants to practice asymmetric warfare. Because they are the primary military entity or capability in Iran that deals with foreign affairs, even though they obviously are involved in domestic issues as well, most of their offensive cyber capability is under the aegis of what's called the Cyber Electronic Command, or the CEC. So very often you'll see references to various parts of the IRGC when talking about Iran's offensive capabilities. Part of the background of this is that they've existed since the 1980s, after the Iranian revolution, under the current supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He sought to basically coup-proof his rule because it was seen as a bit less legitimate than of his predecessor, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. And kind of tried to play off the traditional military against the IRGC. Now, I have not found, Hugo, I think neither of you really a lot of capability in the traditional Iranian armed forces cyber capability.
It's pretty vague, very high level stuff. So I do imagine it's because they have it capped, right? I don't want other people, other states to know what they have, what they know, what they can do. But there's some vague, high-level information, what they do, some of their capabilities. But once again,
I get
very vague, nothing specific. Yeah,
I get the sense it's primarily defensive and also focused on direct cyber warfare. So for example, securing military battlefield communications, electronic countermeasures, jamming, that kind of thing. Within Iran, most cyber activity, quote unquote cyber, is overseen by something called the Supreme Council of Cyberspace that was formed under President Ahmadinejad, I think back in 2012. But given the nebulous state of information around the Iranian government and, the power actors and various organizations in there, and the comparative lack of information that gets out, plus the fact that I don't speak a word of Farsi, except something my college roommate taught me, which is not very polite. Who knows, right? One interesting thing that I want to touch on is also the what's called the National Information Network, which has been an ongoing project to develop a secure domestic internet. Sorry, the closest parallel to this I found has been the Chinese Great Firewall. So I sense this is both a mixture of wanting to secure Iran's domestic network connected capabilities, including its private sector, against foreign attacks, as much as exerting greater state censorship. And
Yeah,
you mentioned this in our first episode on the topic. Just quickly, we have a comparatively low presence of Iranian individual actors uh, abroad, unlike, for example, Chinese trolls or the Israeli diaspora or just casual social media users from every country. This is most likely part of the reason why that there's a lot of censorship, a lot of blockages going on.
yeah. Just to mention also on that topic, which I'll go into a bit more detail after in a bit. One of the reasons, well, is to control their own national information system, so to control their own population. That is a way of obviously censorship, but also manage disinformation and information flow within their own borders to seal and really reveal what's convenient at what times. So it's a bit goes both like hand in hand of protecting their own communications, their own system internally, but also ensuring their own population is controlled per se to a certain level.
Precisely. Um, uh, I've mentioned this in a previous episode, as well as, and you brought this up in our first kind of overview episode about the Middle East, that Iran's cyber capabilities developed really largely as a response to being taken blindsided by Stuxnet, the big attack on their nuclear centrifuges back in 2000 and I forget what. But
So,
it was 10, yeah, this sounds about right.
10, 11, yeah.
Um, that saw a massive expansion of Iran's capabilities, both defensive and offensive, to the point where an IRGC claimed that Iran has the world's fourth most powerful cyber warfare capabilities was supported by an Israeli think tank, and I'll link to that in the comments. Iran's cyber attacks and activities in the context of their geopolitical relationships don't always make sense to me. So, for example, we frequently see this idea of an Iran, Russia, China axis. Iran and the Chinese Honker Union Group, which I think is an awesome name, in 2013, Iran engaged in a back and forth spat of website defacements involving the Iranian Cyber Army, a fairly prominent, heavily, most likely government aligned group. IRGC hackers have taken similar attacks as Chinese and Russian gangs, including SCADA systems, inspired most certainly by Stuxnet, in things like U.S. water infrastructure. And I'll link to a CISA, a U.S. Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency report on this. And by the way, the CISA also has a very, very good overview of Iranian Advanced Persistent Threat, or APT, actors. What really surprised me is that there's a ton of Iranian crypto miners and ransomware activity, which I did not expect. North Korea, absolutely go for monetary gain. Given sanctions on Iran, makes sense. But I would have thought that the Iranians would be much more kind of military minded rather than, and just in causing chaos rather than, trying to go for financial gain. But why not? Right.
Yeah, like just as you mentioned, it's a bit strange regarding how so one of the biggest allies, which is Russia, tends to be more information gathering rather than just straight up ransomware and cryptocurrency and so on. Which once again, I think one of the main issues would be not only the sanctions that Iran has, but also it's a way of financing their own programs. So they might also obviously probably have other ways of doing cyber warfare. They probably have spyware and information and so on. But obviously, ransomware, great in order to finance your own product if it works.
Makes sense.
Crypto, same way.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of
Just
sense.
a way to finance, keep doing your own activities, because obviously Iran has a limited economy regarding, for example, compared to Russia, compared to the US. So they need that finance. They need the money from somewhere. And obviously ransomware is a good method. Crypto, another good method in order to keep it going.
And especially given the kind of state within a state nature of the IRGC, which in some ways is similar to the People's Liberation Army in China and the state-owned enterprises they run, um, makes sense for them to want to maintain kind of separate dark budgets that may be off the radar of other factions in the government. So I don't pretend to know the trends and tensions in the Iranian government, but that makes a lot of sense. Your point about trying to finance their activities. Um, they've engaged in a they Iran as a country and the IRGC specifically has focused tremendously on intelligence gathering and hitting critical infrastructure as well as governments, including interestingly the government of Albania. And I think there's a lot of we'll go after anybody we feel has insulted us as well as those who are opposed to our geopolitical interests and military interests. Obviously, the U.S. and Iran, a lot of the European Union and other countries. Um, and one of the more prominent groups in this has been the oil rig or Helix Kitten APT-34 group that's done a lot of recon, but also attacks on perceived hostile Gulf Cooperation Council countries, their oil infrastructures.
I mean, I do want to jump in, and I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, please,
Um,
absolutely.
I also feel Iran tends to attack smaller countries, less powerful countries. First of all, because they can. So it's not the same attacking Albania and attacking the US or the EU, right? But also to test their own capabilities and methods. It's a great way to just see, hey, if we attack a small country and we're not even able to infiltrate them, we need to change the whole issue. We need to see what's going wrong and change it, update it, invest more, whatever. So I think it's also a bit of a method of both showing power to a certain level, like, hey, we can attack small countries, countries itself, but also see what they're doing wrong internally. It's a way of like preparing, getting experience, real battlefield experience, you could even say. I think that might be one of the reasons why. It's also linked to then your next point, which was oil rigs and oil countries and so on. Once again, tend to be very developed, but step up, but still step down from very big countries like the US, which are very, very well defended, which obviously might be the number one target for Iran.
They have matured tremendously, and I'll get to this one, and I will link to a Council on Foreign Relations site that shows threat actors by country. I had originally thought that they mainly attack targets with some kind of a local or regional impact, and perceived GCC opponents, but it seems to go very very far beyond that with attacks on a global scale. On a global scale, escalating over the past few years, although not nearly as expensive as, for example, Russia's offensive operations or Chinese spying operations. Lots of intel collection and recon, lots of spying on dissidents abroad. And we saw in April a unveiling of a massive campaign against the U.S. Both military agencies and military contractors that was reported. And I'll link to a dark reading article on that. So this has been going for quite a while. So they are definitely not just going for small scale anymore. Your point stands that using these kind of more vulnerable targets as kind of practice, but I think they really are at the point where they've been hitting big targets for a while. The big one, obviously, in 2012 was Shamoon, which took down Saudi Aramco. Just something brutal. I mean, the only one that comes close in my mind to that at the time was Sony Pictures in 2015. That was probably the North Koreans. The attribution is not 100% clear on that one, but it was a group calling itself a cutting sword of justice, which sounds kind of script kiddie, but seems to have it. There's a high degree of certainty that it was Iranian government affiliated rather than just some random idiots. Hello, dear listeners and or viewers across the internet. Apologies for the interruption. This is John. Very shortly after we recorded this video, it occurred to me that we'd actually left out one of the major campaigns of 2012 and 2013. While we are reasonably, more or less, sort of well-informed professionals, we're also fundamentally a bunch of amateurs, so we completely forgot about the so-called Operation Ababil. a massive series of distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks against mostly American financial services firms by a group calling itself the Cyber Fighters of Izz ad-Din al-Qassam, demonstrating a particular gift for marketing and catchy names, also known as the Qassam Cyber Fighters. These attacks came in several waves, purportedly in response to the publication of what looks to have been a quite rabid Islamophobic video from a known right-wing American preacher on YouTube. And they lasted until supposedly the YouTube video was taken down as a reason, although entertainingly, Krebs on Security in 2013 gives as a reason that Iran-based actors turned their attentions to domestic targets as part of the Iranian elections in that year. It's not really clear whether the Qassam cyber fighters were government-aligned, affiliated, related, sponsored, tolerated, but I just thought I'd throw this in because obviously some of you in the cyber threat intelligence analysis field are going to be tearing your hair out at this obvious omission. We apologize for the inconvenience and now return you to your regularly scheduled programming. We have a bunch of pro-government organizations in Iran doing cyber attacks, something similar to what we've seen with the not entirely, but affiliated actors in Russia. And this probably segues into your bit, which was I wasn't able to find a lot of Iranian hacktivist or malware actor groups that are independent of the government, either pro or anti. One prominent example is a group called Elalat Eali that has disrupted state-run broadcasts, broken into judiciary servers, and generally seems to be aligned with protest groups against the regime. Iranian President Raisi just died in a helicopter crash. He was not terribly popular with a lot of people, known as the Butcher of Tehran, when he was a prosecutor, but also heavily involved in the crackdowns against protests recently. And so I wonder whether that's gonna grow. Last point, Dark Reading has an article I'll link to on so-called faketivist groups that dress up as hacktivist groups to cause disruption in the context of the original Gaza war, or ongoing Gaza war, but I think that's more something that you're going to talk about in terms of disinformation.
So yeah, let's jump into a bit more disinformation because it's all very linked. Mm-hmm. So just to mention very quickly, we're going to divide it into like 3 topics. So Iran internally, Iran within the Gaza war, and then Iran-Israel itself. So first of all, obviously, as you mentioned at the beginning, Iran is trying to build their own, for example, internet network and so on internally. This is because they want to control their own population. They need it because there's a country filled with different minorities. Some of them support the government, many don't. There are a lot of protests. Protests keep coming up every few years and so on. So it's a great method of controlling them. Obviously, this is why, for example, the IRGC works with let me see, I have it written down, the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting Service, which is just a news broadcast within the country. And they work very closely to, first of all, see what they broadcast, but also when and to where. So, for example, different areas might see different news or different amounts of the same news. But it also sends, because they obviously highly, highly control the news within Iran. This is because obviously the minorities are there, very different diaspora as well. And one of the biggest examples is, for example, when the protests starting sparking and leveling up a few years ago, I can't exactly remember the date.
The Masa Amini ones back?
Yeah. Iran started broadcasting news regarding the protest, but against the protesters itself. So, for example, seeing how the protesters were attacking the police and how the police were getting injured and how they were just defending local shops and local businesses, when then you saw other images and they were like, oh, well, yeah, 1 police officer got injured, but 200 protesters got injured. So what's the ratio, you know? So that kind of information obviously was very one-sided. The news was constantly flowing, so people did not see something different than what the government wanted to. So obviously that influx created a lot of pro-government people and movements within their own protests. So that was like a bit of a clash. But also it alienated the minorities and also made people attack the minorities outside what was like the police force or the like clashes and so on. So it increased violence within regions towards those minorities and became fairly violent in some cases, which obviously you don't want to reach those extremes, but Iran did, and Iran was able to do it. Like
Do,
how
do,
information moves and how it manages to influence people through emotions and feeling is was very seen and very highly there.
does the government push out propaganda or disinformation domestically via Telegram? I mean, WhatsApp is banned. They've disrupted Viber and Liber in the past. I don't know about Facebook, but does it, I think Telegram has like, I see here 50 million users in Iran. I assume a lot of the pro or the anti-government stuff is coming out on Telegram. Does the government use those channels?
I don't really know. I mean, I imagine Telegram is very anti-government due to the whole encryption and how it is set up. But for example, huge amounts of news and social media is banned in Iran with only few minorities and high-ranking officials being and having the access to them, and only for government reasons, right? For example, Twitter is banned, Facebook is banned. I think Instagram was also banned. So very traditional worldwide use news social media is banned to control and try to manipulate. Obviously, it's impossible. You can use VPNs, different methods. But for example, when VPN usage started to increase in Iran, Iran was thinking about passing a law to ban VPNs itself, which obviously is a bit contradicting because you're people are getting VPNs in order to bypass what you're banning, so they will still do it. I don't know if they ended up banning them. However, I think they did at least ban a few VPN services, but I don't think all of them. But obviously, this is all for just controlling information, spreading, and being able to manipulate the whole issue itself is very surprising because they've done it for a long time now, I'd say, and they're doing it very effectively. So people are either very pro government or you're a minority which is against government, which then you're being targeted not only by the Iranian security forces but also by the local people because within your city you will know your friends who is more pro government, who is not, and that will spread and people will start knowing you and tagging you being one way or the other. So
I mean,
let's move
I
on.
mean, that's something to keep in mind. Like even if Iranian elections are not exactly free and fair, there's still a huge portion of the population that is openly voting for very conservative, the cleric oriented people there. They're very supportive of the IRGC, very nationalistic, very almost reactionary.
Yeah. So, for example, now going to the Gaza war and how Iran is actually very active in it. So, for example, there's a pro-Palestinian group called the Anon Ghost, which allegedly they sent. Well, they hacked the
What's the
Israeli
name again? Sorry, so I can link to it.
Anon Ghost.
Okay, I'm Ghost. Yeah.
They allegedly hacked the Israeli notification warning notification system, and they sent them like missile warning and missile strike warnings to over 20,000 Israelis all over the country during like the Hamas war, which is very surprising. Obviously, this is allegedly. I did not find information that furthered it being true or disproving it, but it all really shows how they're trying to also not only control their population but further population and external people with trying to influence them and also just control them. How people in fear, create a chaos itself. For example, there's also very a lot of huge amounts. With me personally, I've seen them through social media, for example, Twitter, TikTok, and so on. Very pro-Palestinian news of seeing how Israel soldiers are abusing people, straight up killing them, and so on. Apparently, a lot of amount of like a huge number of those videos are fake and they're spread by Iran, Russia, and even China sometimes. So that's not only an Iranian-ish thing, but these videos obviously go and they feed on the emotion of people. Like, it's not common that you see someone going down the street and being shot, and the video being very graphic.
Yeah,
So that
I can
emotion
definitely
that's
tell.
being played, those emotions obviously have a huge impact, and it also anchors. So this anchoring bias, it anchors on people and makes them now believe that's the truth. Then might be disregarded and discredited within like a month or a week or even days. But you've already seen it. You've already made your mind on what's going on.
It's
So it
that,
is
that
very
initial
dangerous.
visual impact. It's an old legal tactic as well. It's in legal terminology, and it's known as so when did you stop beating your wife? And basically you haven't beaten your wife, but it's in the minds of the jury. And I do want to quickly mention here, this is a really, really important point. When I was at university 25 years ago, the Israel Action Committee and the Muslim Student Union, they had tables at either side of the university gate. They were already doing this. They were already putting up flyers that were photoshopped, right? I don't want to do both sides, but this was already this playing with emotions, creating uncertainty about the reality of messages, right? And outright faking it was already, a big thing back in the dark ages. So this is nothing new.
I mean, but not only that, but also how the amount of videos of information, images there are. It's surprising because what you're saying before in your days, uh, it was a pamphlet or newspaper was an image. Nowadays, the amount of videos there are, for example, on Twitter, amazing. And just having to filter through them to see one truth, like one real video, extremely hard. Either you know, or you spend hours looking and doing your research, or everything you see might be fake, might be true. Once again, you don't really know, and you go with what you see first, with what makes you more impact, more emotionally uncomfortable. Let's say.
So who's spreading this? Is this IRGC? Is this aligned groups? I mean, I mentioned the term faketivist that I got from
Yeah.
an article. Like I said, a link to that. Who's actually responsible for this content?
It's a mixture of everything. So to be honest, regarding the Hamas war, it tends to be more government, so more Iran itself and the IRGC.
Mhm.
However, there is non-affiliate, well, like affiliated groups also sharing them, reposting them, spreading them itself. So from my understanding, from what I've read and done my research, it's Iran, like the government itself, and then the IRGC who create the images, who manipulate them, and then start spreading them. But the real spread comes from affiliated groups. So they are the ones who repost the tweet, share the image, spread it around, right? So it's a bit of everything. How one image then becomes fully aware everywhere.
And a lot of
And
it,
also,
a lot of it, I assume is sorry, just real quick, is a lot of it, I assume, is also the quote unquote the concept of the useful idiots, the people who may mean well. They may see this, either they're informed or not, or they just have an opinion and they see this thing that supports their view and they spread it, regardless of what you support.
yeah. And then on further on the topic, they don't only use visual like emotions, for example, existing discontent within countries, which is something very powerful. So there's a fake news and disinformation campaign where Iran stated that the US was giving billions in aid to Israel. It was like over 8 billion, the news stated, while ignoring their own domestic problems, ignoring, for example, the huge student debt and so on. Then the reality is the US was giving Israel around 2 billion, still a huge amount of money, but obviously the difference is very big. But that discomfort on already somewhat alienated people within the US against the government with what's going on. It's further increased because you see, oh, the government's giving 8 billion to Israel. What about us? They're not helping us, but they're helping someone else. It starts also to create problems, not only at, let's say, discontent and discomfort itself, but also somewhat anger itself within the US. Like, why is the government, why is Biden helping Israel within the war, but not helping its own population, people who actually voted for him? They're all trying to play with this, both sharing fake news and information, but also fomenting your own disregard and distrust to your own government, which is very dangerous if you play both of them together.
And it's a really interesting tactic because in the US especially, but also in Europe, there are different there's a really weird political play. um the groups that may be the most isolationist in the US, for example, tend to be the most right-wing ones, the most conservative ones. They tend to historically also be the most pro-Israel ones. And in Europe, it's kind of the same thing. You tend to see, even though a lot of, ultra right-wing groups tend to be very anti-Semitic. Um, Conservative leaning parties, I think, tend to, am I wrong here, be more pro-Israel. So it's a
Yeah,
really interesting way of if not manipulating opinion, then creating dissent and chaos, essentially,
yeah,
instability,
yeah, completely agree.
which
And
is
then
which is the classic Russian playbook.
that was what I was gonna say exactly. This is, from my opinion, from like honestly opinion and belief, they've gotten this from Russia. So Russia is a big player in this information, if not the biggest. Obviously, huge ally of Iran. I think they're obviously sharing tactics in this case, how to do it, how to play, what kind of images, what kind of things to show and spread. I think it goes very hand in hand in this case, and how they're very, very similar tactics. And obviously, once again, allies. So obviously, they're going to talk, they're going to have communication. And in this case, for example, Russia is also helping to spread those fake news because it's in their own interest. Because obviously, they support Iran. They want Israel to be seen as bad because then all the allies are seen as bad and worse within their own countries. So part of the bigger play itself. And then to move on a bit regarding the recent Israel and Iran back and forth attack of missiles showcase, Third World War near event. That was a huge amount of defense information. So I was seeing the whole images and so on at real time when the Iranian attack towards Israel was happening. And obviously the images are very, very impressive. Now I don't know what's real, what I saw was actually real or fake, because apparently Iran used a lot of then fake news and social media to boost images of their own military power, their own capability. So how much of what I saw is truth, I'm in doubt. Not only that, but how much of the news is recorded. So apparently, Iran launched around 300 to 400 missiles, which is on drones, which is huge amount, but around 98 to 99%. Don't fact check me on this because I'm not completely sure, but over 90% of the missiles and drones were destroyed through the Iron Dome. But obviously, the images I saw were missiles destroying parts of the city in Israel and actually landing, which it did happen, but maybe not to the scale people actually saw on social media. And once again, this was all fabricated and spread through Iran, IRGC, Iran affiliated groups, maybe even like Russia, China, different Iranian allies, just to show, try to show power and strength, which in this case, I completely agree that that was their intent.
Well, don't forget. I mean, the Iranians and the Americans and a bunch of others shot down. Sorry, the Jordanians and the Americans and a bunch of other countries shot down a lot of stuff as well. Yeah, what I was just pulling up on my other screen here while you were talking, back in 2008, you may recall the famous Iranian missile Photoshop. Where they just basically it cloned in an image of a bunch of missile launches. They cloned a bunch of missiles to make it look like they had more than they did. And especially that missile and drone attack, to me, it gave me very, very strong vibes. Something I've seen mentioned in a few other podcasts I listened to, that it was the Iranians kind of doing an attack more pro forma to be seen to have attacked, because you got very much the sense afterwards that the Iranians kind of went, okay, we're done. And Biden told Israel, when he famously told Israel, take the win, right? Everybody was like, okay, the dogs have bitten each other. Now, can we please get them apart? Honor has been maintained. You've shown the flag. Please stop.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like in this case, I also have the same feeling. That was just a show of power, show of teeth, who's stronger, who's more powerful. But obviously, only like honestly, I think the truth, the real impact was only known by high level sources in both Iran, Israel, the US, and countries surrounding, because the huge amounts of images, even I saw fake images and I realized while seeing the video. So I saw suddenly planes flying and bombing cities. And it's like, hey, this is not the attack that's going on the news. Like, why is this like with the like Iran attacking Israel hashtag, and stuff like that, just getting all mixed up together. So there's obviously very, very clear fake news campaigns, or that might just be someone trying to troll the whole world and just put it there. But obviously, that also makes it harder to differentiate between what's actually real and fake, and then the impact itself.
Well,
So
one question for you actually in regards to this is press TV is the English language propaganda channel, is the best way I can describe it, is pretty widely known to be discredited, right? It's often mocked. Um, People watch it just to kind of get an idea behind what maybe interpreting what may be happening behind the scenes. I would imagine that most of the content that you're describing went out via social media channels, where it's much easier to masquerade as quote unquote real content and cause confusion. Was this mirrored in the conventional, so specifically press TV as a propaganda channel, or did they realize that most people who know anything, they see press TV as a bit of a joke, so we're just going to kind of mention it but not make a big deal out of it?
so I don't really know about press TV, but I know, for example, some news agencies did wait a bit in order to release a video that they knew was actually truth and very like trustworthy, because with the whole amount of information, images, videos through social media, through Twitter mainly, during that time, it's extremely hard to differentiate. So I did realize that, for example, news agencies, newspaper, Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, all mentioned the news, all mentioned the attack, but none of them really released clear images, clear videos until a few hours had passed, and then actually made the whole report and posted the videos and so on. So I think partly because of what you're mentioning, like how can you differentiate from what's truth, what's not? Maybe wait a bit, and then you'll see the actual images. What keeps recurring, keeps coming up. If one image suddenly starts popping up in Al Jazeera and the same image goes in CNN, which are very different newspapers, might be truthful, might be more trustworthy and not manipulated by Iran than some other image
It's a
itself.
higher chance of it, but still no guarantee. I mean, the missile Photoshop I mentioned earlier, that showed up in most reputable papers' front pages. So I'd still caution, do your own research within
Yeah,
reason.
yeah, I completely agree. And obviously, that's one of the dangers of the whole disinformation, and mainly having big countries like Iran, which also have a big knowledge on how to do it. You can't really trust a lot of it, and it's very, very hard even for news agencies, professionals, and even agencies that are dedicated to fact checking to actually see and disregard a lot of information, because one of the tactics that they use, it's very similar to the Russian one, is flood the whole internet with news about it. If you've sent 1,000 images and 10 of them are true, but you don't really know because you've seen so many.
But ironically, then this is a point you've made in the past. The fact that Iran censors its outgoing internet and clamps down all these channels is that it doesn't have access to the same number of nationalistic trolls and bloggers as, for example, the Russians, and to some degree, despite the Great Firewall of China, the Chinese do, who would be willing to go on Western news sites and social media sites and whatnot and amplify that message. So essentially, the people that the Iranian government and the IRGC are relying on to create and spread this propaganda and disinformation are themselves very closely aligned groups, and then allies, Russians, Chinese groups, whatever, or foreign actors and these useful idiots, but not really the conservative reactionary part of the citizenry that might otherwise go on the internet and say, no, we're supporting the government here 100%. That's an advantage the Israelis with their massive diaspora have abroad with their messaging. So yeah, interesting. We're running out of time again because we are cheap, and Sign is a nonprofit, and I've decided not to give Zoom any more money. So I wanna thank you very much for your insight and your analysis. We still have to figure out what our next episode is going to be, so I invite you to check cybersecurityadvisors.network, our YouTube channel at Cybersec Advisors, and our blog on our website or LinkedIn. And wrapping up, wish you a safe and happy rest of the week, and talk to you soon.
See you.
Thanks, Hugo. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us in this latest edition of the Secure in Mind podcast series, courtesy of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network. Visit us at cybersecurityadvisors.network/media and /blog for additional episodes and articles. Follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, SoundCloud, Podcast Republic, and iTunes, and don't hesitate to get in touch. Stay safe, stay smart, stay educated, and stay secure.